Welcome to another Tuesday AVID Chat. I'm David Harpole and Jack Roan. Good to see you today.
Good to see you, Dave.
Thank you. If you're joining us today, we're going to expand on something that we talk about a lot. We talk about prioritizing things that we want to accomplish, but then we also say that it's important to understand our values, right? That's us at a core as human beings, like really what drives us and motivates us to make decisions. And oftentimes we limit those values or the vocabulary surrounding the values to just kind of basic words, and we don't go deep enough. And we feel being a vocabulary word for an emotion, a lot more to that. So I can share an example just on the feeling side. My son Clayton just did a project on these thinking hats, and one of the thinking hats was on feelings, and he decided that he wanted to draw faces for different feelings. So he drew things that we all associate with: happy, sad, angry. And then he kind of froze. In fact, we kind of looked at each other. My wife, Melissa, and I were like, oh, how about calm? So there's a lot more that is in there that gives more detail to how we feel.
Yeah.
And it's important to know that and try to use those in our vocabulary.
Yeah. Right. So he just had obviously he's 7 years old. He's got a limited vocabulary to express his emotions, but there's probably hundreds of things that you could use to express your emotions. So that's a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the same is true with on the value side of things, right? Like what is valuable to you is much more, we believe, deeper, or should go deeper than just kind of these stereotypical categories, which is life, family, finances.
Right.
There's a list of them, but it kind of limits you. It doesn't give you enough context or direction.
Exactly.
I guess would be a way to say it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Just like you said, like Clayton kind of lacking the vocabulary to describe more nuanced emotions. You just have to expand that vocabulary. So, if you haven't really ever thought or written down like what your values are, like if you just said, here's my top 3 to 5 values and then ordered them in importance, that's a great exercise to do, but I think sometimes it'd be even difficult to come up with, well, what are my values? Like, do I even have the words to describe what my values are? So yeah, expanding that vocabulary of values is helpful because then it gives you more detailed and like nuanced words to talk about your values. So I was joking before we... I was joking before we came on here. I was talking about, English can be somewhat limiting. There's other languages that have words for things that we don't have words for. So joking about like, Japanese has a word for buying books that you're never going to read. There's like a word for that, which I'm so bad about doing that. There's a word for that. Or like, Greek having 3 different words for love. Like it's not just romantic love. There's all, different types of love. And it's a more nuanced word that you can use in different ways. Whereas English, we don't really have that. So the point being, correct, having more words to describe your values would be helpful because then they can be more meaningful to you instead of the first 3 or 4 that pop into your mind that are somewhat basic, just like your example about mad, sad, happy, that type of stuff. So
right. So on a value standpoint, let's think of maybe we can try this exercise with one another. So if let's say that I have travel is important to me. I think that's a big category of a value. Like I want to be able to travel and experience new things. So how can we deepen the word travel? Maybe that's because I feel like I'm adventurous.
Exactly. Yeah. So travel is like an activity, whereas an adventure is kind of a value. So I value adventure. Travel maybe hits that sometime. But maybe there's other things that would. If you value adventure, well, what other things could you do to, live your life in a way that allows you to live according to that value? So that's a great example. So, I said novelty before you get on here. So that's just like, most people would say, I don't like change. I don't like things changing. But some people like just things to change. They like to do different stuff and try new things and kind of expand their horizons. And if that's something that you value, organizing your life and your finances around that value would be important. But it'd be good to know that and be able to describe that and say, I do value novelty. I like things changing and doing different things. Instead of trying to fight against
Mm-hmm.
that and go with, I'd say go with the flow where people don't like change, and
Yeah.
kind of the status quo advice is just keep doing the same thing and keep working and always building towards retirement or something. Maybe it is something different, but instead of trying to force yourself into a status quo, you can say, I do value change and I like doing things differently. Whereas other people might look at you as flaky. You look at it as like, I just like doing different stuff. I like to switch it up. So it's good to know that.
So it's funny as you're saying that, I'm trying to think of more words that would go along with like the adventurous or liking a change and, being on the call, and I'm kind of frozen. But there has to be some resources out there, obviously, to go and say, okay, like in other words, I'm restricted right now this second because I don't have words in front of me that are expanding right off the bat. Adventurous, for example.
Well,
so weren't you reading a book that
has? I have a list of. Well, I have a list of 100 of them, of value words.
Okay.
That I'm not going to give you all 100 of them, but I can give you some examples of words that you can use for value, and then there's a little definition. We'll, like in the description of the video, I'll list some, so maybe we'll put 10 or 15 of them down there just to give you an idea. But there's tons of them, so I'll just read some of these to you. So like, imagination, integrity, knowledge, mastery, self-acceptance, rationality, passion, practicality. Like these are all good value words that if you kind of could describe and say, here's my top 5 values, and here's the order, which is always most important, is this is number 1, this is number 2, because at some point they'll come into conflict with each other. Then you can have a more robust vocabulary to describe what your values are. Like, I value practicality and integrity. Like, then you want to make sure that whatever you're doing job-wise, just the way you kind of organize your life, what you do with your finances, you want to make sure that that you weren't sacrificing those values with the things that you're doing, and kind of plugging yourself, kind of you're the square peg into the round hole of everybody else's values. Mm-hmm. That you would say, these are my values. I'm going to organize my, my finances, I guess is what we're talking about typically. But also, I'm going to build things according to my values and not have to sacrifice my value in order to just live how I kind of the default answer to things. So,
right. Yeah. It's kind of like the compass to make sure you know where you're going, you stay on path. And it is more than financial. I think financially there's ties to everything, but how do you spend your time is part of that. And does it align with those, detailed value vocabulary words that you're using to describe it?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I could think of a million examples of values and how you'd want to organize things in order to live out those values, but everybody is different. The good thing is you can go through and figure out, these are my values. And then I'd like to think of it like, your values are like the sun and the solar system. Like, they're the thing that everything rotates around. Like, that's the most important thing. Right. If you know your values, everything else will rotate around that. That's the biggest thing in your personal universe, is your values. Everything will rotate around that. Where we get stuck sometimes is we focus on all the things going on around, and we never really pay much attention to the values, kind of the center of everything. And you do just, this is what we always say, is like, sometimes it's easy to say something's wrong. I can't put my finger on it. I can't describe to you what I think is going on, but I just feel unsettled about things. I don't know what's going on. I feel like I should be doing something different, but then I don't know what I should be doing. I think most of the time what that is you just haven't taken the time, or you lack the vocabulary, like we're talking about now, is to describe what your values are, because that's probably what you're somewhat sacrificing, but you can't quite describe what that is.
Right. Yeah, I think it's spot on. And I think even a simple exercise of using a list of the vocabulary words and just reading through them to see what's out there, it might start to spark some things like, oh, I never thought of, whatever's being virtuous, or whatever this word might be in there. You say, okay, yeah, that is a little bit of what I'm feeling in there. And that's the starting point. And it's super difficult to do, especially given just life in general, and you're tied between a gazillion things, work and personal, and finding time and leisure to sit down and really trying to craft what those virtues are.
Yes.
Those words.
Yep.
So what do you think? Is there value in doing this exercise with other people or by yourself, or do you think it matters where you start?
I think you could. I mean, like you said, I think if you just expand your vocabulary and you have more words to describe it, I think it would be easier. Like it's easier to draw from the menu than it is just to dream up what you want. Like I think it's just to say, here's a list of 100, let's say. Which one of these things, if you read this off to yourself, really kind of sticks out? Maybe there's, let's say there's 5. I don't know. Like it doesn't have to be a lot. You do want to restrict yourself. You don't want to say I have 50 values. But if you had 3 or 5, your 3 to 5 top values just from a list, and then you order them in importance, which I think I've already said is important, just because at some point they'll come into conflict with each other. So you don't want them, they're not all equal importance. Something is more important than others. You just need to say that because at some point, like if you said family and earning lots of money, whatever, those are 2 values. Well, at some point, those things come in conflict with each other. If you haven't rank ordered them, then you'll just kind of default to status quo, I guess you would say. So you want to order them. But reading through just a menu and saying these are my top 3 to 5, ordering them, I mean, that would get you a long way. But sure. If it's overwhelming, you can't figure it out. I'm somewhat biased, but I think talking through these things and figuring these things out with somebody, whether that's, like I've said a million times, a friend, a good friend that would have these conversations, spouse, if you can do that, or you can always hire a professional that will help you work through some of these things to figure it out. But I think it's incredibly valuable to do that.
Yep. No doubt about it. So that's it for today. Expand your vocabulary and see where it takes you. In our opinion, we think it will definitely deepen the understanding of your core values, which will help you navigate through life, both personally, financially, professionally, and all those aspects that we all deal with. So good to chat with you today.
Right. See you, Dave.
See ya.